Okay, sovereignty and reciprocity. If you listen to the sovereignty as autonomy video, you'll notice that I'm alluding to exchanges. So I want you to keep in mind that reciprocity becomes an important component here. That those that create a supremacy of violence over an area, in other words, establish sovereignty, have incurred costs to do so. They've invested in it. And there'll be those within a group that haven't made that investment. So to maintain reciprocity is to there needs to be some sort of exchange of costs. So when the sovereigns have established a territory, a sovereign territory, they can do whatever they want with it in a de facto sense, in the base sense. There are no competitors. They can be the biggest dicks in the world if they want. But it's in their best interest to cooperate with the rest of those within the region. Okay, so this is the notion of you don't win the war, you win to own the peace. So they establish peace within that territory by eliminating all competitors. Then they can exchange the benefits of sovereignty to the rest of the population to maintain that peace and make that a productive peace. So those that are obtaining liberty, as I said in the video, they're reciprocating to those that have established sovereignty through their productivity and through their peaceful behavior. It's a reciprocal relationship. And then further to that, it's taking on the opportunity cost not to betray it, then reduces liberty down to freedom. So it's the offer of liberty with the exchange of freedom that will take limitations on our liberty to reduce it to freedom to maintain peaceful coexistence. So you have to keep in mind here now, the militia or the military that is establishing and maintaining the sovereignty have paid a cost of which everybody else benefits from. And that needs to be reciprocated. If it's not reciprocated, say the rest of the people, the civilians, if they are undermining the military, they're undermining the very thing that secures their autonomy. And then it falls down. And if the sovereigns are not reciprocating back to those people for their production, say they're enslaving them, that becomes a condition in which resentments build and there's a retaliation, in other words, a rebellion. So reciprocity here becomes a necessary component to maintain those properties. So we're right back around to reciprocity, natural law. Let's see what else we can extend that from. Let's take it across scales. An individual can be autonomous, but an individual cannot be sovereign. I'm going to assert that. So this absolutist notion that he who controls the violence, the executive function of the body of violence, is the sovereign because the rest are acting off his will. So he's the one in control. He's the one that's demonstrating control over that. Therefore, he's the sovereign one, and the rest are secondary to that. This is a flawed notion, and it's a flawed notion as soon as reciprocity comes into place. A body of men together establishing the supremacy of violence creates a sovereign group. So an individual can be autonomous but not sovereign because an individual can always be outnumbered. It's only in our combined and cooperative efforts that we can ensure our autonomy. We ensure each other. So a body of violent men ensuring each other's autonomy creates a sovereign body. And then within that sovereign body, establishing a productive peace maintains that sovereign body. So a total group together can be sovereign, but an individual can't. A king is granted authority by those that maintain the supremacy of violence in exchange for his leadership. And at any given moment, that can break down. Okay, so sovereignty is a group activity that is then used to ensure autonomy on the individual level. So you can think of a militia as men sharing the costs, in other words, of being injured or killed, to maintain a supremacy of violence over an area so that they can reap the benefits of that peace. And they do so by ensuring each other through their ability with violence. So I ensure your autonomy by my willingness to fight for you. And you ensure my sovereignty, my autonomy, by your willingness to fight with me. So we're exchanging and sharing costs and sharing the benefits. And then we can extend those benefits down to those that make our ability to secure a supremacy of violence to them. So for instance, you need supplies, you need infrastructure, you need supporting roles to maintain that fighting body. So you exchange back to them, you give them personal autonomy in exchange of not undermining your own efforts. So this becomes a distinguishing factor between dystopias and just what we would consider just or preferable societies. A tyrant may enslave the people, and that would be akin to predation. By doing so, it suppresses the agency or the autonomy, because it's not extending autonomy to the individuals within the society. It suppresses their agency. So the productivity of the peace, if it's at all established, reduces. And the chance of rebellion and resentment increases. So if a sovereign body isn't respecting reciprocity, and that their sovereignty is a group effort, the sovereignty won't last. So the only sovereignties that last over the longest time horizons are the ones that ensure the agency or the autonomy of the individuals, limited autonomy of the individuals within the group, but also where the individuals within the group contribute to that greater group. Okay, so I'll venture off the sovereignty notion for a bit, and we'll get a little bit into autonomy. Individuals don't exist in isolation. A human that has not been raised by other adult humans doesn't learn how to walk, doesn't learn how to speak. Without speaking, doesn't develop higher order thoughts, can't conceptualize. And all of those become a restriction on their ability to act. So essentially, humans, in the absence of other humans, never grow individually beyond the level of a base animal. They become an expression of their biology alone, with very little intellect there. So for you to grow into an active agent, to an actual agent, rather than an expression of biology and impulse, takes a group around you. And through the exposure of language and through exposure of things like walking or movement, our innate abilities come out. And then from those innate abilities, we can then develop them further. So this notion of atomized individualism ignores what makes an individual possible, which is the greater community. You need peaceful conditions to raise children. You need relative safety and to have a certain degree of freedom so that they can express and explore. So an individual ends up being, to some degree, an expression of the greater collective. If you have collectives, if you have societies that are not respecting the individual, in other words, they're not there to protect the individual, they limit the ability to develop their individuals into active agents. And by doing so, it threatens the productivity and the survivability of the entire group. So there's a reciprocity across scales here, from the individual to the group and from the group back to the individual. As an individual that obtains autonomy because of the sovereign group, that allows me to flourish and grow into something beyond what I would have been on my own. That means I have a debt to pay. I need to pay that back to that community. If I'm not contributing back to the community, that community won't be there for future generations for them to develop into being active agents and then eventually autonomous agents. Or if I'm actively undermining that group, I'm threatening the future of the group, but all of those individuals that would have benefited from it. So this gives us another way of measuring the quality of a society or a culture. If a culture is prioritizing the collective over the individual, they're sacrificing the agency of the individuals, which means they're sacrificing the agency of the collective, because the collective is nothing but the aggregation of those individuals. On the other hand, if a society is prizing the individual at the expense of the collective, they're undermining the cohesion to allow the group to survive, which is what we're seeing in the Western world. So hyper-individualized societies consume themselves. Hyper-collectivized societies grind to a halt. In societies that value the group cohesion, so there is some social value, values and traditions and so on, where that social fabric includes a priority on the protection of the individual, is the type of group structure that accumulates the most agency within its individuals, but also as a group. Okay, so this is actually the European social model. Europeans aren't smarter, not better, they're not most innovative. What we are is the fastest. We adapt and assimilate new ideas faster than anybody else. And this is how we do it. We do it by cultivating individual agency, by protecting the autonomy of individuals for a group of individuals that value the greater society. So it becomes a feedback loop that lays fertile groundwork for the development of agency, which is just the ability to have effects. By distributing autonomy while sharing accountability. Okay, I think that should be good for sovereignty for the time being.